But there's one version of Titanic we have never seen until this morning.
That's right. Experts have used special technology to map the entire ship on the ocean floor and create its digital twin.
In one of history's greatest maritime tragedies, scientists in 2025 unleashed a powerful AI to digitally resurrect the Titanic. And what it revealed shocked the world. Gone were the myths. Gone were the guesses. For the first time ever, we saw exactly how and why the ship sank. A century-old mystery, shattered by code, data, and relentless curiosity. Join us to reveal the true story of how scientists finally solved the Titanic. The mystery of the Titanic. The Titanic wasn't just a ship. It was a symbol of luxury, human progress, and confidence. When it set sail from Southampton on April 10, 1912, it carried not just passengers and cargo, but the weight of a civilization convinced it had conquered nature itself. 4 days later, that illusion shattered as the unsinkable ship vanished beneath the icy waters of the North Atlantic. More than 1,500 lives were lost, and an era came to a brutal end. But what followed was just as enduring as the tragedy itself, a mystery that refused to die. For over a century, the Titanic has remained an open wound in the collective memory of the modern world. From the moment survivors reached New York aboard the RMS Carpathia, people began asking questions that no one could definitively answer. How did it happen? Why wasn't it prevented? And what exactly went wrong beneath the surface that night? Sure, official investigations were conducted, reports were written, testimonies were given. But the deeper mechanical truths, the how and why of the Titanic's physical demise, remained shrouded in confusion, speculation, and myth. Initial reports in 1912 suggested the Titanic had suffered a massive gash, a long tear that opened the hull like a can. It was a simple explanation for a simple world.
Some images, things that the Titanic clearly would have passed on its way to the big monster iceberg.
A big ship hits a big iceberg, gets a big hole, sinks. But even then, that version didn't sit well with some engineers and maritime experts. Titanic was divided into 16 supposedly watertight compartments. It was designed to float with up to 4 of them flooded. So how did a single iceberg cause so much damage so fast? Over the decades, alternative theories took shape. Some believed the steel used to build the Titanic was brittle and shattered upon impact. Others suspected the rivets were of poor quality, snapping under stress like dry twigs. Still others proposed that human error and poor judgment, from the speed of the ship to the location of the iceberg warnings, were the real culprits. Then came the discovery of the wreck. In September 1985, a joint American-French expedition led by Dr. Robert Ballard finally found the wreck of the Titanic. It rested some 12,500 feet beneath the surface, split into 2 main sections and scattered across the seafloor. Cameras captured eerie images of railings, teacups, and bed frames frozen in time. For the first time, the world saw the ghost of the great ship. And yet, even with video evidence, the mystery deepened. How exactly did the ship break in two? Did it split at the surface or underwater? Why were the 2 halves located so far apart? Why were some areas of the ship intact while others were mangled? The murkiness of the water, the decay, and the sheer scale of the wreck made these questions harder to answer than anyone expected. Ballard's team provided a new theory. The ship hadn't suffered one long gash, but rather a series of small slits and punctures along the starboard side. These were enough to allow water to spill into 6 compartments, 2 more than Titanic could survive. But without extant measurements and structural models, the theory remained just that, a theory. In the years that followed, more expeditions followed, some scientific, others borderline sensational. Documentaries were made, artifacts were retrieved. Hollywood added its own dramatic lens in 1997 with James Cameron's Titanic, reigniting global obsession. But still, the mechanical truth remained incomplete. We knew pieces of the puzzle, but not how they fit together. Part of the reason for this persistent mystery was technological. At nearly 2.5 miles deep, the Titanic rests in one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth. The pressure at that depth exceeds 6,000 pounds per square inch. Darkness is absolute. The water is near freezing. Exploring the wreck requires state-of-the-art submersibles, robotic arms, and sonar, all expensive, all limited. Even when researchers brought back thousands of images and hours of footage, the data was too massive, too fragmented to be comprehensively analyzed by human eyes alone. For years, scientists were looking at the Titanic through a keyhole. What they needed was a door. And in 2025, they finally opened it. For decades, we thought we had the Titanic figured out. The event was simple, widely accepted, and emotionally satisfying. The world's largest and most luxurious passenger liner struck an iceberg, suffered a massive breach, and tragically sank in less than 3 hours. What we thought we knew. It was a cautionary record of human error, a ship believed to be unsinkable, defeated by nature in the most poetic of ironies. But beneath the surface of that story, both literally and figuratively, were fractures, not just in steel, but in the facts. Even the first formal inquiries in 1912 by both British and American commissions left room for doubt. Survivors gave conflicting accounts. Some said they heard explosions. Others claimed the ship broke apart before it sank, a detail officials refused to accept at the time. Naval architects gave careful explanations, but without physical access to the wreck, their conclusions were mostly educated guesses. And so the Titanic quickly became more than a disaster. It became a myth, layered with speculation, half-truths, and folklore. One of the most enduring misconceptions was that the Titanic's hull was ripped open by the iceberg, a giant gash running hundreds of feet along its starboard side. This image was popularized by artists' sketches, early newspaper illustrations, and even survivor descriptions, despite the fact that no one actually saw the damage firsthand. This version of the story made sense. A glancing blow, steel torn like paper, water flooding in at a terrifying speed. It was dramatic, it was terrifying, and it was, as we now know, wrong. In the 1990s, forensic studies and underwater footage from submersibles suggested something different. Rather than one massive rupture, the hull had been punctured in multiple small areas, likely along riveted seams. But without full access to the entire starboard side, buried deep in sediment, this theory couldn't be confirmed. So, the myth of the gash persisted. Another theory that gained traction over the years focused on construction materials, specifically the quality of the steel and the iron rivets used in Titanic's hull. Some experts argued that the steel became brittle in freezing temperatures, making it more vulnerable to impact. Others found evidence suggesting that cheaper iron rivets were used in critical sections of the ship, especially near the bow. These rivets, it was claimed, may have popped or sheared under stress, allowing seawater to force its way in through seams that should have held. Was this a cost-cutting measure? An oversight? A failure of industrial standards at the time? No one could say for sure. But the idea that Titanic may have been flawed, not just unlucky, deepened the emotional impact of the tragedy. Still, these theories rested largely on laboratory tests, a few recovered hull fragments, and educated assumptions. The full story was still locked within the wreck itself, untouched and largely unmapped. Then there was the issue of how the Titanic broke apart. For years, officials insisted the ship sank in one piece. Survivors who claimed otherwise were either ignored or dismissed. It wasn't until the wreck was discovered in 1985, lying in two main sections nearly 600 meters apart, that their accounts were finally validated. But even then, questions remained. Where did it break? How did it break? Was it the weight of the water that pulled it in half at the surface, or did the ship split as it fell through the water column? Engineering models produced competing answers. Some suggested a failure in the ship's keel due to unsupported weight. Others pointed to stress near the expansion joint, where two main structural sections met. But again, these ideas lacked precise measurements or comprehensive visual data from the wreckage. Despite over a century of books, films, documentaries, and research expeditions, Titanic experts still struggled to answer basic questions. The ship's final moments, between the iceberg strike at 11:40 p.m. and its disappearance beneath the sea at 2:30 a.m., remained hazy. How fast did each compartment flood? Which structural elements failed first? Did the stern rise to a vertical angle, as many claimed? Or did it bend and fold under its own weight? Even James Cameron, who directed Titanic in 1997 and has personally visited the wreck multiple times, has changed his views over the years. His initial portrayal of the sinking was based on the best information available at the time. But even with Hollywood budgets and cutting-edge simulations, there were still too many unknowns. That's the core issue. For over a century, we were building a record from fragments, eyewitnesses with limited visibility, partial blueprints, incomplete footage, scattered debris fields, and a wreck we could never fully see or touch. We had pieces of the puzzle, but no way to fit them together with precision, until now. Because in 2025, artificial intelligence did something no human researcher could. It saw the Titanic all at once, every joint, every bend, every bolt. It processed the fragments, stitched them together, and rendered the wreck in full, haunting detail. Not as a myth, not as a metaphor, but as it really was, and that changed everything. It started not in the depths of the Atlantic, but in the silence of data centers, where machine learning, 3D imaging, and computational modeling quietly intersected to create a revolution. A revolution with a name: digital twin technology. The rise of the twin technology. In the simplest terms, a digital twin is a perfect virtual replica of a physical object, down to the tiniest detail. But in practice, it's something far more powerful.
A digital twin is a virtual representation of an object or a system. Like me, digital twins are updated with real-time data which can be used for machine learning and reasoning.
It's the ability to see inside something that cannot be touched, turned over, or taken apart. For decades, engineers used digital twins to simulate aircraft, engines, or buildings. But in 2025, scientists applied it to something else: the RMS Titanic. And that changed everything. The Titanic lies about 12,500 feet beneath the ocean's surface, crushed by pressure, buried in silt, and decaying more with every passing year. Divers and remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, had captured hundreds of hours of footage over the decades, but no single expedition had ever completely scanned the wreck, let alone in full high-resolution detail. That changed when a UK-based deep-sea mapping company partnered with marine archaeologists and AI developers to launch the most ambitious Titanic expedition in history. Their mission? To scan every inch of the wreck site, including both halves of the ship, the debris field, and surrounding seafloor, using next-generation sonar and photogrammetry. The team spent 6 weeks at sea, using submersibles equipped with laser scanners, sonar, and 4K imaging systems. The result? Over 700,000 individual images from multiple angles stitched together into the most detailed visual record of the Titanic ever created. And while that alone was groundbreaking, it was only step one. The real magic happened once artificial intelligence stepped in. Traditional 3D models are static, visual references, useful for documentation or display. But a digital twin is dynamic. It can be manipulated, tested, simulated, and analyzed in ways that no real-world object can withstand. For Titanic, this meant engineers could now zoom into the smallest rivet, simulate how specific sections buckled under pressure, measure internal displacements and hull fractures, reconstruct timelines of how the ship took on water, even match personal artifacts to passenger locations based on cabin blueprints. All of this was done not in the ocean, but in a computer. And the engine behind it all? Artificial intelligence. No human being could manually review and process 700,000 images of the Titanic. Nor could they catalog every inch of a 269-meter ship resting in fragments across a half-mile of sea floor. But AI could. Advanced neural networks were trained to identify every feature in the wreckage, from hull plates and portholes to lifeboat davits and brass fittings. Where sonar returns were fuzzy, AI used probabilistic modeling to reconstruct surfaces. Where lighting conditions obscured detail, machine learning filled in the gaps using nearby reference points and object recognition. In effect, the AI created the most faithful digital resurrection of the Titanic ever attempted. And because it wasn't limited by fatigue, emotion, or human error, it saw what we had missed. It detected structural failures, patterns in metal fatigue, compression lines that hinted at internal stress fractures. It even identified warping patterns that told engineers exactly how the stern twisted and folded before it detached from the bow. It wasn't just modeling, it was forensics. And the wreck became the witness. For historians and engineers, the Titanic digital twin was like unlocking a time capsule. They could simulate the moment of impact, adjust variables like speed, angle, and material resistance. They could virtually rewind the ship's collapse and observe how long each compartment withstood flooding. Most stunning of all, the AI helped answer a critical question that had eluded experts for over a century. Did the ship truly break apart at the surface, or did the split happen underwater? Now, by studying pressure fractures and metal deformation, precisely measured by the digital twin, researchers could say with confidence that the Titanic broke on the surface, as many survivors described, but in a far more complex and violent sequence than anyone realized. This wasn't guesswork anymore. It was precision. Today, the Titanic digital twin is not just a museum piece. It's a living research tool. Scientists use it to study corrosion. Engineers use it to explore material science in extreme environments. Even ethicists are debating how this technology should influence decisions around shipwreck preservation and potential artifact recovery. But above all, it did something no expedition, no documentary, and no deep-sea dive had ever done. It gave us a complete picture. A century-old ship, lost to the sea, rendered in vivid digital clarity. Its tragedy laid bare not by storytellers or survivors, but by pure, unblinking data. The role of AI in reconstructing the wreck. The Titanic digital twin was a breakthrough in and of itself, an extraordinary feat of imaging, sonar, and engineering. But even a perfect replica is just a shell, until something brings it to life. That something was artificial intelligence, the analytical mind behind the machine. It wasn't just a tool. It became the most tireless investigator in maritime history. And once the data was fed into its neural architecture, the Titanic started to speak. After the 2022-23 expedition, researchers returned with a staggering 16 terabytes of raw data, over 700,000 images, thousands of sonar sweeps, magnetometer readings, and laser scans. Individually, these data points offered snapshots, angles, textures, fragments, but collectively, they held the key to reconstructing the exact conditions, damage, and demise of the ship. The problem? No team of humans could possibly analyze that much data in any reasonable amount of time. Even if they did, they would inevitably introduce biases, inconsistencies, and blind spots. This is where artificial intelligence became indispensable. Machine learning algorithms were trained to process, align, and interpret all of this information. Unlike traditional human-led analysis, AI could compare images pixel by pixel, spot anomalies, reconstruct fractured shapes, and identify repeating structural patterns even when obscured by debris, rusticles, or decades of decay. Where humans saw chaos, AI found coherence. One of the wreck's biggest mysteries was the starboard hull, the side that collided with the iceberg. For over 100 years, it remained partially buried in sediment, making it almost impossible to study directly. But with enough overlapping image data and depth readings, AI was able to mathematically interpolate the hull's full geometry. Using advanced photogrammetry, the AI filled in the gaps, reconstructed the contours, and revealed something startling. There was no giant gash. Instead, the hull showed a series of small, narrow fractures, barely a few feet long, running along riveted seams. This was consistent with earlier theories, but had never been proven until now. It confirmed what survivor accounts had suggested, and what forensic metallurgists had long suspected. Titanic didn't tear apart like paper. It unzipped, quietly and fatally. The AI didn't stop with the exterior. It created an internal schematic of the ship by overlaying its 3D data with original blueprints, passenger records, and engineering diagrams. As a result, researchers could now walk through Titanic's virtual corridors, digitally, seeing how each room collapsed, shifted, or remained intact. In the engine room, AI analysis showed signs of intentional valve manipulations, evidence that Titanic's engineers had stayed at their posts, trying to maintain electrical power and delay the sinking as long as possible. In the grand staircase, warped structural beams revealed how the ship's internal support columns twisted under stress before snapping. AI even identified the precise moment the keel fractured, the death blow that led to the stern detaching. It used deformation analysis, metal stress modeling, and sediment displacement patterns to simulate how the ship's spine buckled under its own weight as the bow sank faster than the stern. The ship wasn't just sinking, it was tearing itself apart in slow mechanical agony. Armed with the complete digital twin and thousands of reconstructed variables, researchers then ran AI-driven simulations of the Titanic disaster, from iceberg impact to its final plunge. These simulations didn't just animate what happened, they showed why it happened, down to the second. By inputting Titanic's speed, the angle of the iceberg strike, water temperature, and the ship's internal layout, AI could demonstrate the exact order in which the watertight compartments filled. It revealed that the collision damaged 6 compartments, not 4, as originally estimated, which overwhelmed the ship's buoyancy design. It also explained a long-debated mystery: why the lights stayed on until moments before the stern vanished. AI simulations showed that power systems were rerouted through still functional circuitry in the stern, made possible by engineering heroics and by design redundancies no one had fully appreciated until now. Even more astonishing, AI simulations recreated the breakup sequence with such precision that researchers could overlay survivor testimonies, some of which had been dismissed for decades, and see that they were telling the truth all along. One example, several survivors reported seeing the stern rise nearly vertical, pause, and then twist before disappearing. Some experts once thought this was implausible, but AI proved it was not only possible, it was exactly what happened. Perhaps AI's greatest contribution was its lack of sentimentality. Unlike historians or filmmakers, it wasn't looking to tell a dramatic story. It wasn't bound by assumptions, biases, or legacy theories. It didn't care whether Titanic's demise made for a good story. It just looked at the data and followed it. What it found was not a tale of hubris punished by nature, but a series of precise, cascading mechanical failures, made worse by a perfect storm of miscommunication, design limitations, and tragic timing. And in doing so, it didn't replace the human story. It made it more human. The panic, the bravery, the heartbreak. AI gave context to chaos. It offered clarity without commentary. Today, thanks to AI, we don't just see the Titanic. We understand it. Every bolt, every bend, every fault line. We know where it failed, how it failed, and why it was doomed the moment 6 compartments were breached. And what's most haunting is not what AI told us, it's how much we already knew, but could never prove. For over a century, the sinking of the Titanic remained one of the most analyzed maritime disasters in history. Iceberg collision, yes, but why did the ship split in 2? Why did it sink so rapidly? Why did so many die when it was supposedly unsinkable? What really sank the ship? Every generation of experts seemed to have a different explanation, but in 2025, with the help of AI and digital twin technology, researchers were finally able to deliver a precise, evidence-backed answer. The Titanic was doomed by a chain reaction of structural flaws that were invisible at the surface until it was too late. The verdict delivered by AI wasn't a wild theory or a reinterpretation of survivor testimonies. It was rooted in physics, metallurgy, and fluid dynamics, all fused together in the most detailed simulation ever created. And for the first time, it revealed exactly how the Titanic broke and why it was never going to survive its maiden voyage once disaster struck. AI confirmed what has long been known. The Titanic struck an iceberg at approximately 11:40 p.m. on April 14, 1912.
And now a new groundbreaking 3D scan may give us more information about how the ship struck the iceberg.
The collision caused ruptures in 5 of the ship's 16 watertight compartments. But the digital reconstruction revealed something more alarming. The damage pattern didn't align with earlier assumptions of a long gash. Instead, multiple small puncture holes and buckled plates across several forward compartments allowed seawater to pour in faster than previously thought. In short, the iceberg didn't tear a massive wound. It exploited weaknesses in the rivets and steel, creating pressure points that caused rapid flooding. Within just 10 minutes, AI showed the Titanic's fate was sealed. One of the most shocking conclusions from the AI simulation was about the Titanic's steel. Using metallurgical data collected from the actual wreck site and comparing it with modern analysis, the AI determined that the ship's hull plates contained high levels of sulfur and phosphorus, elements that make steel brittle, especially in cold temperatures. In the 28° Fahrenheit, which is -2°C waters of the North Atlantic, the Titanic's hull was dangerously fragile. When the iceberg struck, the steel didn't flex. It fractured. The AI's high-speed simulation showed the metal cracking in slow motion, a phenomenon known as brittle fracture. Instead of absorbing the impact and staying watertight, the hull broke open like glass. The Titanic was not only vulnerable, it was already breaking from the inside out. What happened next was a deadly domino effect. As the forward compartments filled, the bow began to sink. AI revealed that the watertight bulkheads were not sealed at the top, allowing water to spill over into adjacent compartments like a cascading waterfall. Survivors had long mentioned this behavior, but now, for the first time, it was modeled and confirmed. Then came the fatal twist. Around 2:18 a.m., just before the ship snapped in two, the simulation showed an intense strain on the keel, the ship's backbone. The steel could not handle the forces created by the rising stern and sinking bow. In a matter of seconds, the Titanic's midsection buckled and fractured, leading to the dramatic breakup. This moment had been debated for decades. Some believed the ship sank intact, while others pointed to eyewitness accounts of a breakup. AI ended the debate. Not only did the ship break apart, it had no chance of holding together under the combined forces of structural stress, water pressure, and flawed construction. Perhaps the most humbling takeaway was what AI revealed about the ship's rivets, the metal pins that held the Titanic together. These rivets, especially those in the bow, were made from substandard iron, not the stronger steel used elsewhere. The builders had run short of high-grade rivets and substituted lower-quality materials in some sections, especially near the front. Under impact, these weaker rivets popped like buttons, allowing seams to burst open. This detail had been theorized before, but AI confirmed it with chilling clarity. Using digital twin replication, engineers simulated the impact forces and saw how thousands of tiny rivets failed almost simultaneously. The ship, built to be unsinkable, had been compromised by cost-cutting decisions and human pride. AI also answered another long-standing question. Could more lives have been saved? Yes and no. The ship's design flaws, lack of adequate lifeboats, poor emergency protocol, and overconfidence by the crew all played a role. But AI showed that once the ship's bow began to flood, the window for effective evacuation was incredibly short, less than 45 minutes before the deck began to tilt severely. Crew training was minimal, distress signals were delayed, and many passengers were still below deck when the ship began to list. AI simulations revealed that even with better lifeboat access, the panic, darkness, and freezing temperatures would have made large-scale rescue efforts nearly impossible without nearby ships. In the end, AI concluded that the Titanic sank because of a perfect storm of factors. Brittle steel, weakened by cold temperatures, weak rivets in critical areas, a flawed watertight bulkhead system, overconfidence in an unsinkable design, and an iceberg that struck just right or just wrong. It wasn't just bad luck. It was engineering failure, corporate compromise, and human arrogance all wrapped into one tragic voyage. The AI didn't just give us a new record, it gave us the final word. The Titanic wasn't just a victim of nature, it was a victim of its own myth. Public reaction to AI breakthrough. When news broke in early 2025 that AI had finally resolved the enduring mysteries of the Titanic's sinking, the world didn't just take notice, it erupted. From social media threads to international news panels, documentaries to dinner table debates, the public reaction was electric. The Titanic, long held in cultural memory as both a tragedy and a symbol of human ambition, had been reborn through technology. And with this digital resurrection came a wave of emotion, curiosity, skepticism, and hope. The first wave of reaction was one of awe. Millions viewed the AI-generated 3D simulations within days of their release.
New digital scan of the Titanic has offered an unprecedented insight into the ship's final moments. A detailed three-dimensional reconstruction of the wreck reveals engineers worked to keep the lights on.
The detail was breathtaking. Rusted deck railings, collapsed staircases, scattered personal belongings, all reconstructed with eerie precision. It felt less like watching a model and more like standing aboard the Titanic itself. People across generations, from school children learning about the tragedy for the first time to elderly descendants of survivors, expressed an overwhelming sense of emotional connection. For many, it wasn't just about the Titanic anymore. It was about what AI could do for other historical enigmas, from Amelia Earhart's final flight to ancient sunken cities in the Mediterranean. The technology offered more than answers. It gave a sense of time travel, of standing in the past and finally understanding it. A particularly emotional aspect of the public response came from descendants of Titanic passengers and crew. For over a century, families had carried incomplete stories, rumors of heroism, questions about final moments, speculation about what their ancestors saw, did, or endured. With the AI-generated simulations and revised sequence of events, many felt a new kind of closure. Some found validation. Accounts of lifeboat delays or ignored warnings were confirmed with striking clarity. Some scholars questioned the reliance on AI-generated conclusions, pointing out that no algorithm is immune to data bias. If flawed survivor testimonies or inaccurate sonar readings were used, the results could mislead rather than clarify. A few even warned against romanticizing digital reconstructions, arguing that they can sometimes sanitize tragedy or lead to false emotional certainty. Ironically, the release of a seemingly definitive account didn't silence all doubters. It galvanized them. A subset of Titanic conspiracy theorists rejected the AI findings outright, insisting they were part of a broader effort to erase the truth. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and click on the video shown on your screen.